Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show, and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Jeff Swystun, who is agency lead and consulting CMO for Swystun Communications, also author of the book, Why Marketing Works. I'm super excited to talk to you today, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here, Nikki. Thank you.
Good stuff. Looks like you're getting some sunshine out where you are, as am I here in Austin, Texas. So that always puts a smile on my face. The thing is, we're going to talk about 7 principles in marketing that everyone should know. Some of the things that are covered in Jeff's book, 7 principles of explosive top-line growth. But Jeff, before we get into that, I'd love to hear just a little bit of background on yourself and what you and Swystun Communications have been up to these days.
You bet. I actually started my career at Deloitte and Price Waterhouse as a marketing consultant and spent some time then on Madison Avenue with Interbrand. I was chief marketing officer there. Moved over to DDB Worldwide, which is one of the top ad agencies, and I was their chief communications officer. And for the last 7 years, I've been running Swystun Communications, and actually that is focused on the intersection of brand and business strategy. And for your listeners, I'm primarily working in professional services, law firms, accounting firms, ad agencies, consultancies. So lots of great B2B experience that I hope to share as we talk.
Good stuff. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you were you were a madman.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's what my mom said too.
So one of the first things that you and I had sort of discussed offline as it relates to these 7 principles is the fact that there are so many tools in tech in marketing, probably more now than ever before. But how, in the absence of solid fundamentals, that can just turn into throwing money away and still being irrelevant. Talk a little bit to us, Jeff, about how folks avoid that.
Yeah, it's so we've got all this tech now, and my industry's talking about artificial intelligence and what that will do, programmatic advertising, big data, little data, medium data. And to tell you the truth, I think everyone's head is spinning with this stuff. And there's a lot of promises out there now that with the ability to measure ad impact and all these things that the tools are making us, I think, a bit lazy. And there's an overabundance now of communications, and it's really tough to break through that clutter. We live in this world of broadcasting, but we're still really weak when it comes to engagement, persuasion, and selling. And that's because I think we are missing the fundamentals. I speak at business schools. They're not even teaching segmentation anymore. All that arts and crafts stuff that goes into storytelling and positioning, I think, is weaker today than it was 15 years ago because we're just gravitating towards tech and thinking tech's going to solve everything. And it started with social media. Social media was just going to make, selling anything fantastic. And now we know it's like white noise, and Facebook is basically a birthday app, and, everyone's confused.
Yeah, for sure. There is sort of an obsession with what can we, in terms of outreach, right? Or reach, what can we automate? And then how can we measure it? And then how can we see who is, according to these, mediums that you talked about, right? Like Facebook, see who's liking and clicking with it. And then imagining that equals engagement, but, maybe it doesn't, right?
Well, and I think because all marketing to me is storytelling. So if you don't have a compelling, evolving story, What are you actually communicating? And what are people clicking and liking? Is it a sales sheet, a product description? Those are things for the sales force, not the prospect. The prospect wants a story because as humans, we communicate through stories. And there's some great storytelling out there, but I think we're getting it confused with the technology that's at our fingertips now.
For sure. And that's this next point of brands, B2B brands in particular, really thinking about whether or not their marketing efforts are tactics versus actual strategy. And like you talked about, these tools can sort of lend themselves to becoming seeing what tactics we can leverage versus developing actual strategy that has to do with the humans that we're trying to reach. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I see so many B2B brands are definitely tactics in search of a strategy. They're marketing. It's get me a Facebook page. Well, does that make sense? I don't know. Should we be looking at programmatic advertising? Don't know. Put a culture video on LinkedIn and everyone's going to love us. They make sense unto themselves, but do they make sense as a coherent strategy? I always ask my clients 3 questions, and they're not earth-shattering, but they really start with the strategy. What do you have that's unique? Because, of course, marketing is all about differentiators. So what do you truly have that's unique? Who wants or needs it? And those are 2 very different questions because wants and needs go to psychology and they're different drivers of how we react to things. And how do those people then, once we've identified them, how do they like to be engaged? And that last question is, okay, what are the tactics to get to them? But the first 2 questions are the strategic ones. And there's 3 simple questions and the 100 other questions roll out of them. But if you don't start there, then you are going to be just putting together a Facebook page and hoping for the best.
For sure, right. So folks have got it upside down. They are. We're starting with the tactics. And then maybe letting that build a strategy and just not being effective there. And I like what you talked about when you said this idea of being a want and a need. I saw something that you had, some content that you had put out that was talking about that's where brands need to be, right at that intersection of want and need. And so I think that's really, really important. And I think that B2C brands sort of caught on to that sort of thing a long time before B2B brands have just now started to catch up. And that's one of the other things that you and I were talking about offline, this idea that B2B brands can be as fun and as creative as B2C brands. But for so long, the way that we approached solving the problem in B2B was in this very technical way that was a little bit detached from the human aspect of it in a way that B2C kind of knocks out of the park. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, the B2B brands historically, some do it really well, but historically, and still a large measure of them, just talk about sort of the tangible benefits, and they don't get to the emotional benefits. They don't get to the higher order benefits of why someone wants to connect with them in any way. And it's so funny, I witnessed this when I was on Madison Avenue. Most creative people on accounts would rather, work on a beer brand than Boeing. They just thought that was not sexy. It's unfun because B2C brands always allowed more creative freedom to do stuff. But I see B2B brands opening up to this now. And you said right at the top of our conversation about emotion. And that's something I cover in the book. And it's something B2B brands, professional services really need to focus in on, is using a compelling story with emotion to compel people to get in touch. And I do that with law firms. They're so straight-laced and stiff. Yet what they do is so humanistic because it deals with people's lives in real, tangible ways. You don't want to be irreverent and goofy and, get a mascot for a law firm, but you can speak to people in a real emotional way. And I see B2B brands starting to do that more. I really like what HP did with Sprout. They put out a great video called Hands. Sprout is this technology that allows you to, it's like a machine that allows you to put together amazing physical and digital, innovative, immersive experience and create your own videos. And they did this video called Hands. And I can tell you, it touches your heart. And then you go, wow, I would really like to put my hands on that product, on that actual innovation and get to working with it. So they know that they can tap into emotion.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I'm excited to see where B2B brands take this. And what's really cool about this concept is that it's applicable across disciplines. So we're talking about it, in the context of marketers, but I, spent some time as a salesperson in SaaS in the B2B space. And storytelling is going to be the thing that separates, the average from the great in that, in that role as well. And so I think the more that marketing starts to do that in B2B, the more that sales leadership starts to catch on to that, the more that across, like I said, the entire space, and not only is it going to, bring more revenue to those organizations, but I just think a lot of folks in B2B are solving really important problems. And if the goal is to make everybody's lives better, then the better we tell these stories, the better we tap into this people-centered approach, the better it is for everybody.
I love that you talked about revenue there, because another example I love was when the startup Mailbox produced a video. And Mailbox was, an app that was about organizing your life online. And it was simply showed a young woman out for a walk. There was no words. There was just some bouncy music. There was no words over the screen. It just showed her using the product. And then Mailbox literally had no revenue, but that video was so compelling that they were bought by Dropbox for $100 million. Because that was just, it brought it to life. It said, well, you can organize your life and still have time for a 2-hour walk in the afternoon. And wow, $100 million purchase as a result.
Yeah, I mean, it's lights out. So I know folks listening are getting excited and probably like, where can I begin? And you talk about in your book these 7 principles that B2B leaders need to leverage when they're building their brand. Dig into those a little bit for us.
Certainly. Yeah. So what I did is when writing this book, I went back about 200-300 years and looked at every cool marketing story I could. And, like everyone, we kind of get tired of talking about Coke, McDonald's, and Apple. So I've got some really obscure ones in this book that I think people will enjoy reading. They'll probably twig some old memories. But the 7 principles, and the first one is huge for B2B brands, is position your offer as a solution. And as soon as you do that, it's about making people's lives easier, more rewarding, all of that stuff. It really crystallizes your story the minute you begin to package yourself as a solution. Next is tell it in the form of a story, because we've been speaking about that people naturally respond to stories. Insert emotion. We've already touched on this, so this is great. In B2B, can really learn to do this better. And build relationships. I always see B2B as kind of like transactional, one-off. Okay, we got that, tick the box, next. But you really want people coming back for obvious reasons. And once you've got a core group of people coming back, build a community. This is something B2C brands do inherently, and B2B brands still need to learn to do. Lastly, make sure there's an experience around this, and that's how the community keeps coming back. And get away from that cold transactional nature that has been at the heart of B2B for too long. Mm-hmm. And then finally, as we every brand learns through trial and error, you got to be authentic, open, and honest, or all of this falls apart.
Right. Yeah, no, so many of those are ones, again, that resonate with me from my, Austin obviously is a startup hub, right? So I've spent some short stints, but we're going to start it. It's like dog years, right? It grows you. So a lot of this stuff is just, it's so powerful. So the building relationships, I think that was one of the things that I wish that I had felt in the B2B environment more for you to do as an individual contributor, as a salesperson. And I don't know what the marketing team's experiences are with that as far as relationships, but I suspect it's sort of that same struggle, right? So much emphasis is on the acquisition, the procurement part of the funnel or part of the customer journey. And then the relationship is just supposed to sort of happen because they like the product so much. But there isn't a lot of effort put into the people aspect of building that relationship. And sort of the story of my fall and get back up in my own career has been this idea that relationships are revenue. So I love the fact that that's included in these principles. And then the fact that you talk about community as well. So those are obviously my favorites, but these are all good stuff. You guys run out and get this book. The last thing that I wanted to have you touch on was this idea that marketing is an ongoing experiment, and that there's going to be some trial and error. But you talk about this concept of smart failing and how to expect that and get ahead of it and use it to your advantage. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I always say that, blow up the lab when it comes to marketing. Have a lot of fun with it. Try different things. And it's also, I'm going to steal from Dickens, marketing is also a furious plagiarism. So if you see something that's, someone's doing well, and it doesn't have to be in the same industry, don't graft on something that is inauthentic to your brand, but give it a try. And that's why I talk about in the book too, that smart failing is to be expected. If you can if you have got the goalposts in mind, blow the guardrails out a bit, try different things, and have fun with it. That mitigated risk is there for a reason. The most celebrated CMO in the world right now is a fellow I've gotten to know online, where I've never met, but he's the CMO of Burger King. He's just, on hitting all the top lists. Burger King's knocking it out of the park. And it's because he's just trying different things every week and having a lot of fun with the brand.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'll have to go in. What's his name? I feel silly having to ask you that.
Fernando Machado. And if you can find him on Instagram and Twitter, please do, because it's kind of fun. And he's promised me he's going to send me a Burger King shirt. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm in it for the shirt. Yes, yeah. There's the expertise, but the shirt. So this has been really great. You've given us this is my dream for this show, is always to have sort of this mix of actionable stuff and fun stories and passion. And there's such a passion for what you do and in the way that you speak about it. So I know folks are going to be really excited to follow along with you. But before we get to closing this thing out, now that I've extracted things from your brain, I am interested in what you're putting in it. Jeff, tell us a little bit about what learning resource you have been engaging with recently that is, getting you excited or informing your approach.
Yeah, I've got two. One is I love Flipboard. So I'm on Flipboard. It's kind of my go-to in the morning. And that Flipboard, if you don't know it, it's a nice, I look at it on my iPad, so it's nice and big. And I've got subjects, advertising, CMOs, branding, etc. And so I can flip through and see rough headlines of everything going on in my industry. And then I can drill down. And so like by 9:00, my brain's already full of, interesting stuff. And given that I'm a Canadian, I'm going to hype a podcast, and actually it's a radio show on CBC Radio. And then they put it out as a podcast. It's called Under the Influence, and by a fellow by the name of Terry O'Reilly. He's an old Toronto ad guy, and he does a fantastic show. So Under the Influence is one I totally recommend, and I think you can find it in all podcast suppliers or CBC Radio. Yeah. And he's supposedly reading my book right now, so I'm looking forward to his review of my book.
I like how you said supposedly. I'll be honest with you. I'm not as of late. I'm not a pages between the fingers kind of girl. I tend to do more audiobooks. Is your book available on audiobook?
No, I'd love to do that, and I would love to be the orator myself. So we'll see. I think that's driven by book sales. So those people who do like books, buy it, and then Nikki might get her audiobook.
You with your Canadian accent, the world needs that to be narrating this book. So I will start a petition. I'll do what needs to be done.
I've got a great face for radio.
Last thing, I know folks are going to want to know how to catch up with you and follow along with the content that you put out. How can folks best connect with you, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm everywhere. But if you want to go to my website, it's even got my phone number there, and you can call me right up. So that's SwystunCommunications.com. And please get in touch. I love just to wrap around these topics. So, the meter's not always running. If you've got a problem, I love to hop on the phone or answer an email. So please, listeners, do reach out.
Good stuff, man. That's Swystun like piston. Jeff, thank you so much. We'll have to have you on again in the future if you write another book, or just to touch base and see if you ever got that Burger King t-shirt.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to follow up on that Burger King t-shirt.
Thanks so much, Jeff. You have a good one.
And you.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.